Hello, my name is Sean. I'd like to thank you for coming along today to watch this Think 32 panel discussion for this year's Gas Yard Féile. As in every year, the Gas Yard Féile offers a large range of events, and a full list of those can be found on their website. I'd like to thank you all for joining us today. I'd like to thank Patricia Devlin for agreeing to host, and also I'd like to thank the members of the panel for taking time in their very busy schedules to participate. I'm sure everyone watching will be eager to hear their opinions. I'd like to thank Féile again for allowing us to talk about the topic of Irish unity. At Think 32, we believe that as a conversation around the constitutional question grows, there needs to be more action in relation to planning and preparation for the question that almost everyone, including many unionists, believe will happen when a border poll is eventually called. The importance of planning and preparation for such an important question was no more so evident than in the aftermath of the Brexit vote. Currently, we sit 7 years on from that vote, and we do not have a government in the north of Ireland, because political unionism believed they were voting for something totally different. In the event of a border poll, there needs to be a clear understanding of what the citizens of this island will be voting for. It is also very important for unionism to have a voice at this table. Simply ignoring the growing conversation around in New Ireland and the almost daily reports on the damage to the UK economy following Brexit will do their electorate no favours when a poll is nicely called. I'd like to thank you again for watching, and I hope you enjoy this panel discussion, and feel free to act with Think32 at Think32 at Think_32 on Twitter. I'll now pass over to Patricia. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Sean, and it's a pleasure to chair this panel on what is a very important discussion for everyone on this island and beyond. Firstly, can I say thank you to Think 32 and the Féile for hosting this debate, and also to our panelists who have taken time out, as Sean said, in their busy schedules. We have just a short time today to talk about such a huge topic. I have no doubt there's going to be so many views and perspectives here that's going to give so much food for thought. So before we get stuck in, I'm just going to ask each of the panelists to briefly introduce themselves. And I'll start with the first on my screen here, Mr. Aaron Edwards.
Thanks, Trish, and thanks to the organisers for inviting me on. My name is Aaron Edwards. I'm an academic and author of A People Under Siege, the Unionists in Northern Ireland from Partition to Brexit and Beyond.
Thank you, Aaron. And Emma?
Thanks, Trish. Lovely to be with you all here today. I'm a writer, campaigner and peace builder, currently co-founder of the Civic Initiative in Northern Ireland and other such work.
Thanks, Emma. And Jim?
Hi, Patricia. Thanks very much for hosting this, and thanks to Sean and Think 32 for inviting me. My name is Jim Callaghan. I'm a Fianna Fáil TD for the constituency of Dublin Bay South. I have been a TD since 2016, and I'm the Fianna Fáil Party spokesperson on justice.
Great, thank you, Jim. And last but certainly not least, Lynn.
Senator Lynn Boylan, formerly a member of the European Parliament, and I'm the party spokesperson on climate justice, but I'm also the vice chair of the Sinn Féin Commission on a United Ireland discussion. So delighted to be here. Thanks a million for the invitation, and looking forward to the discussion.
Fantastic. And as you can see, we've got a fantastic diverse line of panelists today. So I'll get stuck in. My first question, it's now been 3 years since Brexit. How have you seen the discussion on Irish unity change in that time? And I'll go first to Emma.
Thanks, Tricia. I think that if you look back over the last 7 years, really since the Brexit referendum, there's no way to argue that there hasn't been a significant shift in terms of these conversations. We're now having debates on primetime TV, we're having debates here at festivals. This is something that has become part of discourse across this island. And of course, there was the significant Ireland Future event in Dublin last year, which had leaders from several political parties present and speaking in support of this move. So I think that, as we have seen, Brexit has changed the argument as well, because prior to Brexit, the idea of United Ireland or a border poll may have been something primarily an aspiration for those who are nationalist community. But I think that Brexit had an effect in terms of changing the objectives, because obviously a United Ireland is a return to the European Union, and that will naturally be attractive to more than just traditional nationalists. So it's changed how people perceive the idea of a United Ireland. It's now looking at it through an economic perspective, through what is going to be the best outcome for my children in terms of giving them a better future. And it has inherently shifted that kind of conversation into something that is much more expansive, much more inclusive, and really is quite prevalent now. If you look even at the universities, we have several universities working on significant bodies of work and research on constitutional change, and that simply would not have been happening 7 years ago.
Very interesting, and you're absolutely right, Emma. Those conversations weren't happening 7 years ago. Can I come to Aaron with that question, and what are your thoughts on that? Because we know you come from, a unionist background. You have your finger very much on the pulse when it comes to unionism. What's happening in those circles, and the thoughts on this conversation?
Yes, there's no doubt that the discussion has become more audible since Brexit referendum for the reasons outlined, and that this is no longer confined to the echo chamber of social media. So I think that it's spilled over into discussion fora right across the island, whether or not it's actually reached everyone is an open question. I believe that it has been limited in the sense that it hasn't engaged with unionism at all. And in fact, and we can go on to talk about why that is the case. But I think that because they haven't participated in that debate or discussion around about constitutional futures, that it feels like only half a conversation has begun. And so for me, it's undoubtedly spilled out beyond the social media echo chamber, but it really is still very limited in scope.
Good points, Aaron. And Lynn, what's your thoughts on how the conversation has changed?
I'm probably going to contradict Aaron slightly. I think that when Brexit initially happened, and even just prior to Brexit, when you had conversations about a united Ireland, they were quite basic, reductive conversations about flags and symbolism. Whereas now what we've seen, in the years that have passed, and I suppose for us as a political party in Sinn Féin, the discussions around Brexit, we knew that this was, Brexit was fundamental in terms of the detail of what could happen if a Brexit vote happened. And I think that now has filtered down into the mainstream. So what you're saying is people want to talk about, well, if we had a united Ireland, what does a united Ireland health system look like? What does that mean for education? What does that mean for the taxation policies? And I was at the Belfast Commission on United Ireland there recently. No, it was just a women's event. There were 100 women in the room. They wanted to know what it meant for their pension entitlements. Do you know what I mean? And so there's conversations now, I think, that people are looking much more in detail at, how exactly would this work out? And I think that's a really positive thing. You'd seen that the Shannon had the public consultation as well, and there was lots of submissions on that. And even the type of organizations that made submissions to that show you that this is now far more mature debate and conversation about what does a future United Ireland look like and how do we get there.
Brilliant. And Jim, what's your thoughts?
Well, Patricia, Brexit was an enormous political event, and obviously it was a huge political event for Britain. But similarly, like a lot of things that's happened in British history, it has a huge impact on this island as well. I suppose we need to appreciate the limitation of our knowledge at present. We haven't yet determined, or we don't know yet, what's the final resting place of Brexit. But what we can do is we can look back over the previous 3 years and look to see, well, what is British policy in respect of Brexit? And I think it's apparent if you look at Rishi Sunak's government, and if you look at probably what will be the next government, which is Keir Starmer's Labour government, that clearly the impetus and the, I suppose, policy direction of British governments is to try, bizarrely, to get closer links with the European Union. That appears to be what Sunak's trying to do now. That appears to be what Keir Starmer will try to do in the future. But at some stage, there's going to become an endpoint, a resting point, where no further, I suppose, connection or proximity to the European Union will be permissible for the vast majority of the people of the United Kingdom, except for the people in Northern Ireland. And they will, I suppose, have an opportunity and will realize that if they want greater assimilation and proximity to the European Union, the only way to achieve that is through pursuing a discussion about a united Ireland. And I think that has had a momentous change on the issue of Irish unification, because no longer is Irish unification simply viewed as a aspiration. It can be viewed as a solution. And I don't think a lot of people certainly in Northern Ireland would have viewed it as a solution to issues. And I think now it's an issue that is certainly for other old communities in Northern Ireland, they're going to see there's going to be obstacles put in their way in terms of assimilation within the European Union and connection with the European Union. Irish reunification is a solution to that.
Very good. Thanks, Jim. So moving on to my second question, and I think Aaron sort of touched on this in one of his answers. Brexit has no doubt intensified and accelerated the debate on Irish unity, but has enough consideration been given to the views of those from a Protestant unionist loyalist background on the issue? And I'll go to Lynn first on this one.
Well, I think it's certainly part and parcel of our political party's approach to, the discussions around a united Ireland is, that a united Ireland has to be respectful of all of the cultures and the diversity that live on this island, and that everybody's voice needs to be heard. And I think there's been huge effort made, certainly from ourselves, to make sure that there is space for that. And again, I go back to that women's event in Belfast where there were, women from the unionist community talking about, their concerns, and they might have been very different to those concerns of women from a nationalist background. Likewise, at the youth event we had, young people were very conscious of the need to, make sure that the unionist community and their culture and the things that are important to them come with a united Ireland. But I think there's probably, it's very hard to have a conversation with someone who doesn't want to talk. And I think that that's probably part of the problem, is in terms of the unionist leadership, is that they don't want to have the conversation. And how do you, I suppose, build that bridge to, go, look, even if you're going to oppose, if there is a referendum in the future and you'll make the case for staying within the union, you need to be at the table. You need to be having the conversation. You need to be representing the people that, who elect you to represent them, and to make sure their voices are heard or are considered. So I think that that's the biggest challenge for us, is as was engaging the unionist leadership in bringing them to the table to have the conversation.
Aaron, would you agree with Lynn's assessment there that there are unionist politicians just not willing to engage on the issue? And please also give me your thoughts on my original question.
Well, yes, I mean, this is something I've been speaking about recently, and so there is a refusal to engage because it's seen as in some ways ceding ground. Why would you negotiate the terms of your surrender if you don't feel defeated? So in a way, the leadership here, I think, is caught up in its own internal political battles over the Windsor Framework Agreement. And so it's very much concentrating on the immediate future rather than looking to the longer term. So I think that when we look at this debate about Irish unity, unfortunately, from the PUL perspective, it's very much bound up and synonymous from their perspective with Sinn Féin's agenda on this. So, I mean, that would be very much where the discussion is based. It's stuck because it hasn't been broadened out. So I think that it's perfectly legitimate for people to have these conversations and discussions. Absolutely. I mean, within the terms of the Good Friday Agreement, the idea of consent and aspiration and practicing and feeling your own political identity was quite important. But I think that the fact that we've seen over recent years, actually not only the dislocating effects of Brexit on unionism, but actually the dislocating effects of a more audible voice within unionism to turn against the peace process, which has been, very dangerous consequences, and I think has a bearing on this discussion around the future. So just to come back to, the change in discussion, I don't think that it has moved anywhere within the unionist community beyond some of the quite creative thinking of Alex Kane and others who have been prepared to, look beyond the immediate future. So I think that from the point of view of unionists, there is no buy-in. There is no buy-in at all. And I think it's for the other parties to work out, if indeed this is a coalition, a multi-party effort moving forward, how you engage people who, as Lynn said, are refusing to have the conversation in the first place.
Very, very good points, Aaron. And I mean, do you have any thoughts on what it would take for unionist politicians or others to willingly want to have that conversation, or is that just not at that stage?
I mean, it's probably a much broader question about, unionist confidence and political insecurity, really, that they have to resolve themselves. I'm speaking from a non-party perspective on this. And so far, there's so much competition within political unionism that they aren't speaking with one voice in a whole range of issues. So I'm not surprised that this has not been taken forward, that the nettle has not been grasped. But I bring it back to the first principles for unionism, which is that they wouldn't want to negotiate a surrender, the terms of their own surrender. For them, it's an evisceration of their political identity completely, whether or not safeguards are put in place within a new Ireland or a future constitutional transition. For them, it would be tantamount to the end for them. So it's seen in very nihilistic terms.
Great. And Jim, you have spoken out previously on your thoughts on what needs to be done to, engage unionists into this conversation. I mean, what's your thoughts on how much engagement there really has been with the PUL community?
Well, thanks, Tricia. It was very interesting to listen to Aaron there. And actually, I didn't realize, Aaron, that you're the author of the book Siege. So I actually started reading it about a week ago, and I look forward to finishing it. And what I've read so far is extremely interesting. And I must say it's up there. Like, I read Susan McKay's books during the summer, both volumes that she wrote over a period of 20 years. And listen, we all have so much to learn about communities that we think we understand, but we don't really fully understand, I suppose, different communities that are on the island. But so that's the beauty of the diversity of the island. In terms of Brexit, like we've spoken about Brexit, all the negativities of it, there can be some positives from Brexit. Like, one of the positives could be that it could break us all out of our sort of binary assessment of the politics of the island. And I must say that, when you ask about the PUL community, like, that isn't one homogenous community in the same way Catholic nationalist Republicans aren't one homogenous community in the north. And I suppose the benefit and the opportunity from Brexit is that people might look at the issue of Irish reunification away from the legacy that we all have. And like, one of the big problems discussing for unions to engage in it is because of their legacy, the legacy of what happened during the Troubles, the legacy of what happened 100 years ago with the establishment of Northern Ireland, their belief that it's their responsibility to keep this going because of what had been achieved by their political ancestors. It's like Brexit, I hope, will break it down so that people can look at this in pure economic terms as well, and social terms, and also broadening it out. Like, we have always been an outlooking people on this island, irrespective of what community we're from. And there's a huge desire in Ireland to be part of the broader European project. And I just hope that as the discussion about Irish reunification broadens and we look at the consequences of Brexit, that people will see there's great opportunities for us as different communities, non-homogenous communities on this island, to build our bridges, obviously with Britain, but also with Europe. And there's opportunities to do that by sharing the island together. I'd sometimes fear, and be interested to hear what Aaron has to say about this, sometimes people from a unionist perspective look at a discussion about Irish reunification as being a takeover by the south of Northern Ireland. Like, that's not what I'm talking about. I suspect it's not what other people here who advocate Irish reunification are talking about. We're really talking about a merger, two jurisdictions deciding to come together and to establish a new country. And I think that's something that's exciting. And I think it's something that will become more relevant as the consequences, economic consequences of Brexit become more apparent.
Thanks, Jim. And Emma, as a peace builder, what's your thoughts on whether enough engagement has been made with the PUL community?
Well, listen, there's always room for more engagement. And I'm a really big advocate of actually trying to roll out deliberative dialogues all across the island of Ireland, taking these conversations into town halls and into communities. And I far rather favour that kind of dialogue versus things like all island citizens assemblies, because this is much more of an expansive approach. And you need to have these conversations with people in their communities to be able to address some of the issues and concerns that are being raised. Now, on engagement with the PUL community, I think it's really important that we remember the Good Friday Agreement respects two divergent aspirations. One is to remain part of the UK, and the other is to, reunite with the island of Ireland. And I think that a lot of unionism and political unionism for sure is going to campaign to remain part of the UK, and that is to be respected. I think the idea that unionism must come to the table and must be involved in the planning for United Ireland, is undermining their actual aspiration to remain part of the union. And if you flip that, how many nationalist politicians are going to go and engage with Arlene Foster's Together UK and do plans on how to make Northern Ireland better in the UK, So I think we have to respect there are two divergent aspirations here. There'll be a yes and no campaign, and it's going to be, that's going to be an inevitable consequence of what we're doing here. That's democracy, So I think that's one point. Despite that, there is still engagement. So you do have, civic unionism engaging in a way perhaps the political unionism won't. You see that in some of the university research projects. I know there was a really good piece of work done by Joanna McMinn and Fidelma Ash looking at women's inclusion in constitutional conversations, and they had participation from loyalist and unionist women in that. And then, of course, the Shannon consultation, I delivered evidence to that, and there were several unionist representatives there as well. So there already is engagement, so we can just kind of build on that at a sort of local community level.
Great, Emma, thank you. Moving south, what is the appetite in the Republic for Irish unity? What are seen as the pros, the cons, the sticking points? So I think probably this would be better answered by Jim or Lynn. So Jim, I'll get you to go first. What is the appetite for Irish unity south of the border?
I'll try to answer that question succinctly and then just elaborate on it, Tricia. My own view is that if the majority of people of Northern Ireland wish to see Irish unification, that the South will vote for that and support that. That's my own assessment of it. And that's not purely on sort of, emotive, historic grounds. I think there's a complete buy-in in the South to the Good Friday Agreement. There's a clear recognition within that we as a jurisdiction have said that if another jurisdiction, Northern Ireland, decides it wishes to become part of a united Ireland, we will have a referendum, and I think it would pass here. That isn't to say, however, that there aren't issues or concerns about it. And I suppose one of the things you have to ensure is that we don't repeat the mistakes of Brexit, that if we're going to have a referendum about Irish unification, that we know what we're voting for, so that we don't vote for something and then we debate how it's going to materialize after that. So I think it is important in respect of it. It's unquestionably true. I would have thought if you asked people, say, 40 years ago, in terms people in the South, where was the North or Northern Ireland in terms of their lists of political priorities, it would be quite high up. I suspect now it's quite low down. And that's, I suppose, just a reflection of the fact that day-to-day political issues in the South are to do with sort of what we would call bread and butter political issues. And fortunately, I suppose, because the violence in Northern Ireland has ended, that it's not so much dominant in the Irish media life cycle or the Irish political cycle. But nonetheless, I think there is a responsibility on all politicians who seek to advocate for Irish unification and who recognise that part of the Good Friday Agreement means that that may occur and it could be outside our control as to whether or not there's a referendum. There's an obligation on us to put forward proposals as to how we say, or what we say this would look like. And I remember being on and I'm concluding this, being on a debate with, I think it was Doug Beattie, leader of the Ulster Unionists, and I was talking about how, we would have an agreed Ireland where we would have a new constitution. And he was asked, well, what do you think of that? He said, well, show it to me. I think that's a legitimate response. Like, I think it's going to be a lot to expect unionism to come to the table to discuss United Ireland, but I don't think it's too much to say that those who advocate United Ireland should be putting out proposals as to what we say it would look like. And there won't be, won't be a unanimous view. I'm sure Lynn will have a different view to what mine will be, to what anyone else will be. But there's a responsibility on political parties who advocate reunification for us to set out to everyone in Northern Ireland and indeed the South what it would look like in the future.
Brilliant, thanks, Jim. Lynn, what's your thoughts?
On the appetite for United Ireland in the South?
Appetite and Jim's thoughts as well, if you'd like to respond to those.
Yeah, I suppose the first thing is it depends on who you ask. If you were to only get your information from the Irish Times, you'd probably say there's zero appetite whatsoever. But when it comes to when you're actually having conversations with people, I think, there's a couple of things have happened. One, obviously, the peace process and sort of the porous nature of the border now, and people in the South feeling far more comfortable to go north, and and the growing tourism industry and all of that. And I mean, even during COVID, you've seen like lots of people from the South flocking to the north when the restrictions were different. So I think it's become, the familiarity between the two jurisdictions is a lot greater. But I also think like that just with Brexit, that really sort of, I suppose, crystallized it for a lot of people. And, that it wasn't fair. You had a fact that there were people on a part of this island that voted to remain within the European Union, and yet they were being taken out against their will. And I think, fundamentally there's something wrong with that. Do you know what I mean? If you're a Democrat, there's something wrong with that. So I think the conversations are happening, and that's why I suppose from our party's point of view is we need to do the preparation, and we're doing the preparation as much as we can with our United Ireland Commission and engaging with all of the other civic society conversations that are happening. But in order for to have, I suppose, the legitimacy and the credibility and as broad a conversation as possible, that's why that citizens' assembly is so fundamental to the process. So like Emma talked about a grassroots approach. Yes, you can do both. You can go out into communities and do that, but I think you also need to have that citizens' assembly which really puts flesh on the bones, because I don't think it would be right for Sinn Féin to turn around and go, we believe that this is the model of what a United Ireland should look like, whether that is, federalism, or whether that's, setting up a new parliament. I honestly think that would be very undemocratic for a political party to do that. I think what you need to do is put out, here are the options. Let's have the conversation. Let's hear from everybody. And, we've proven with the Citizens' Assembly model that actually, you bring in people with very different views. And when they hear from experts and they hear from people with real lived experience of a situation, and they're in a calm environment, they actually, come to very mature, and well thought through recommendations. And that's why I think the Citizens' Assembly is so critical, to allow us to sort of have that, but have, I suppose, that it's broader. It's not seen as coming from a political party. It's not seen as civic society, which might undermine the recommendations at the end. If it's a Citizens' Assembly with the backing of government, I think it carries that much more weight. But nobody should go into that process with, preordained conditions as to what they think that future Ireland would look like. I think everything should be on the table for discussion.
Just out of interest, Lynn, can I ask, what's the engagement like with younger people who, probably won't even remember the Good Friday Agreement being signed, might even have been born in the South? What's their engagement like on the topic in the South?
Well, that's what I'm saying. It was only a few weeks ago we had an event in Dublin with we reached out to Féile and a number of youth groups, and initially it was just for Dublin young people, but people travelled from outside of Dublin to attend it. Such was the interest in the conversation. And the one thing that I came away with was the kids are all right, because see, if whether it's a United Ireland or just the future of a partitioned Ireland, the views that they were bringing to the table and their, I suppose, ability to just be so inclusive of, diversity and of progressive politics. It was really, really an uplifting event, but they were very much clued into this conversation and very much believing that they will see United Ireland, in the next decade was their view coming out of that meeting.
Interesting. Thanks, Lynn. Emma, your work takes you all over Ireland and actually all over the world. So what has your engagement been like with people in the South on this topic? What feedback are you getting?
Well, I suppose I probably would take a more pessimistic outlook on this, because I primarily write for a Southern audience and have worked in Dublin for the last number of years. And my viewpoint as a Northerner in that context is that the greatest barrier is actually North and South in terms of understanding. I think that there is a lot of work to be done to build understanding between people across this island. I think there's a lot of outdated, lazy stereotypes that still circulate. And I think that there is a misperception about Northern Ireland that is still prevalent within the Republic. I also think that there is, the idea that the South is just going to vote through a yes. I don't think that's a given. I think that's evidenced by much of the research, much of the surveys, polls, all indicate that as soon as you talk about changes to the current Irish state, support for United Ireland drops. When you talk about taxes, when you talk about changing the flag, talking about changing the national anthem, any of these issues, you see a significant drop in support. And the way to approach that and get over that kind of aversion is to have conversations, to talk about why changing a flag might be a good idea. I'm someone who identifies as Irish, but I advocate for changing the flag. And when you have a conversation with people as to why that might be a good thing, when you understand the context and the misuse of flags in Northern Ireland, and also the fact that, a new Ireland, a United Ireland, however you want to call it, it would be a new state, at least in my view, my vision. And the idea that the South is going to subsume the North, I don't think is realistic. So it also is a place that I think would deserve a new national symbol, because it's not just about unionism and nationalism. We are a very diverse island. 1 in 5 people in the Republic weren't born in the UK or Ireland. Northern Ireland too is becoming increasingly diverse. There are a lot of voices and viewpoints and perspectives, and I think it opens up a conversation about what does it mean to be Irish today, and how do we create something new from that? I mean, that's what is appealing to me about the conversation, is opportunity. So I think there's a lot of work that needs to be done, and I don't think it should be taken for granted that people will vote it through. I think if there's not a lot of work done in advance, if we don't have a blueprint, then this referendum is definitely a risk. I mean, Jim spoke there about a need to know what we're voting for, but what is his party doing to prepare for that is what I would ask. And in fact, any of the government parties, what are they doing to prepare in terms of creating a vision and a blueprint and a plan for what people are going to vote for? And I also think Sinn Féin's approach of just having everything on the table doesn't work either. You have to be able to have a vision that people can buy into.
Jim, could I ask you to answer Emma's question?
Yeah. Well, listen, parties need to do more, is my assessment of it, okay? But we've to recognize I suppose, the pressures that are on political parties as well, just dealing with day-to-day political issues. Now, I've put forward proposals in respect of what a unified Ireland would look like. I agree with you, Emma. I think Fianna Fáil should come forward with a proposal as a party that seeks to achieve reunification. I think it would be beneficial in terms of Fianna Fáil putting forward what we view the policy would be in respect of what a new united Ireland would look like. I suppose if we look at what the Taoiseach has done in foreign affairs, and the shared Ireland unit in the Department of the Taoiseach, a lot of groundwork I would have thought is being done. And I suppose we need to be wary as well. A lot of political movement on this, I suppose, is constrained by what's happening in the politics of Northern Ireland at present. The primary focus, I suppose, of all politicians and governments on the island is to try to ensure we get the executive and assembly back up running in Northern Ireland. And that does have an impact, I think, on bigger conversations.
Brilliant. Lynn, do you have any thoughts on the points Emma raised?
Well, again, I go back to the point of the democracy is so important, and having the conversations. And that's why I suppose that idea of you can have all of the groundwork that's been done, and that there is so much going on at the moment. And, even the shared island unit, and some of the work that's there. But unless you give, I suppose, that structure of a citizens' assembly where you're bringing in people who will go, here, look, here's the benefits of this type of model, or here's the benefits of that type of model, then I don't think it's democratic to set out going, this is exactly what we want, before you engage with the citizens assembly type approach. What we do know is that, whatever, if there was a united Ireland, it's not going to be simply a case of, tacking the 6 counties onto the 26 counties, or the 26 counties subsuming the 6 counties. I mean, that's absolutely not the vision that we have for a united Ireland. What we want is a new country, a new republic, that does recognize people, that is, inclusive and diverse and progressive. So you can set out that sort of vision, but I think when you get down to those nuts and bolts, you really do have to engage with the citizens, and the citizens have to drive that. Otherwise, you do run the risk of falling into the Brexit scenario, where you have political parties going out and going, Brexit means Brexit, and this is what we want, and we're not for changing. And I think that's the type of politics we're actually trying to get away from, is that sort of very polarizing politics. It has to be about engagement. You have to be open to shifting your position.
Very well said, Lynn. Aaron, you're an academic. I'm sure you have many contacts in the South, and you've spoken about this at length. What's the sort of feedback that you're receiving?
I mean, I can see things from all the different perspectives there, that really more work is required. And really, this has been set out most recently by Professor Brendan O'Leary and others, where they've tried to really get this conversation into a more practical frame work, so that it is, about how you build and how you basically reassemble a country. So the debate, whether it's reunification or unification, I think has to start from the perspective of, what do you do with a sizable minority of people who may not want to be within this new Ireland, or shared, vision for the future? They may want to exclude themselves. I think that's unfortunately a sticking point, and I don't want to be the one to keep, coming back to this, but I think it's important that, the people, North and South, need to know what they're voting for. And, and I don't want to get into this discussion about whether or not a unionist veto is alive and well and should even be entertained. What I'm merely trying to say is that there will be a sizable minority of people who do not want to share that future, even if it is inclusive, because it's not one that they recognize, that they are not equipped to deal with the change, the fundamental root and branch change that will come about, because they haven't had the conversation, they haven't even entertained the notion in their own heads. So I think with the sort of, with the appetite in the South, I'd say at a governmental level, and I would agree with what Emma has mapped out there, that there is an intergenerational churn within all governments, and I think that we're seeing that currently with the government in Dublin, that there is a view perhaps that this has been resolved, that it's a balanced accommodation, that a united Ireland and a border poll will come at some point in the future, but it's something way off in the future, not immediate, not where from a Sinn Féin perspective we can see it is immediate, it is something pressing, it is a live agenda item. But I think there, from my point of view, that breaking down those stereotypes, breaking down the mistrust, because there is mistrust across the island, and misperceptions of how people live their lives, who they are. I mean, we really haven't heard an awful lot from, as Emma has pointed out, those new Irish citizens. So I think that even in Northern Ireland, I'm seeing that now, where you have got new people, people coming to the island, both north and south, and that they need to be brought into that kind of vision for the future as well. They need to be accommodated. So I think we've moved beyond simply the, this two traditions model. That's the way academics would have interpreted it in the past, and how governments would have interpreted it in the past. And I think it's now about, how do you build a more inclusive citizenship, where people can be active citizens regardless of their, where they've come from, who they are, in terms of their identities. So I think that's the big task ahead for those who want to map out more of a more of a practical future, rather than what to me seems still quite aspirational.
Thanks, Aaron. Moving on to the next question. At Ireland's Future debate last year, we heard from James Nesbitt, who I'm sure everybody knows who he is. He's an actor, but his background, he's a Protestant from a unionist background, who declared it was time for a new Union of Ireland, one that would accommodate all identities and allegiances. In your opinion, can this be achieved? And so I'm sorry to go to you again, Aaron. What's your thoughts on Mr. Nesbitt's comments?
Well, I'm going to try and answer this positively. I think a greater union of people anywhere in the world is to be, one that's inclusive, one that draws in people regardless of their individual politics, creed, race, religion, ethnicity, sexual orientation, etc., is to be welcomed. Of course, I mean it's a good thing. But I think that the idea of a new Union of Ireland would mean doing something to the old union, or the old unions that exist. So that would require buy-in, and and a move beyond wishful thinking. And the point that I want to make, which I think sort of connects up some of what I've been saying already in previous questions, is that we have deep divisions within the North, now, and we have always had. So why would a new Union of Ireland lead to the disintegration or the evaporation of those divisions? I'm just curious, because I am an advocate for breaking down barriers between people, and so that seems very enticing to me, but I don't know how we actually go about doing that.
Fair enough. Emma, what's your thoughts?
Well, I think if you look at maybe the response to Nesbitt's New Union of Ireland, that terminology, right? I mean, he actually got quite a negative kickback from some within the nationalist community for calling it Union of Ireland, right? And I mean, I don't care what it's called, as long as it's a better future for me and my family. And I think that kickback that he received over the language shows us just how much work has to be done to get people around the table to understand that this is not going to be what you think it is right now, that the current Irish state is not going to remain as it is in the event of constitutional change. I mean, if you look even at the education system as one example, you have two wildly divergent education systems on the island of Ireland. And how you go about creating an all-island education system that is going to be inclusive, that is going to be something that people can really believe in, that work hasn't been done yet, and those conversations haven't been had. So that what happens is, because we haven't had those proper debates and conversations, because there isn't work and research being done on that, people have questions over what that might mean. Will that mean that their children are all going to have to learn Irish in the event of a united Ireland? Will that mean that their children are going to go to a Catholic school? I mean, 90% of the South's primary schools are state funded, but still church run. So I think that we do need to have those kind of conversations, how to make it more inclusive and bring all those identities into conversation. That's not going to be achieved by 100 citizens in a citizens' assembly, and it's not going to be achieved in the way that we're having these conversations now. It needs to be opened up into such a broader debate. And my concern is that looking at those issues, it will take a long time. I mean, figuring out all the nitty bits about changing those areas will take years, and that work's not being done now. And the problem is we can't control the timeline. So whenever the herd moves, and this could get called and we won't be ready for it.
Brilliant points, Emma. Lynn, were you at the conference last year? Did you hear Mr. Nesbitt's comments in person?
No, I wasn't there, unfortunately. But like, I suppose what I take from it, is that it's a positive message in the sense of that, it's that thing again, it's that we don't want to just continue the status quo, but with a 32 county status quo or the 6 counties tacked on. This is about selling a very positive message to everybody who lives on this island. I was at I was an election observer at the Callaghan referendum a few years back, and I was really taken back by the speeches at the event, the rally the night before, and they talked about cosmopolitan nationalism, and that it was that anybody who lived within Catalonia, who identified with the values and and this future that they wanted for themselves, are part of it, are Catalan, and have a say in it. And I think that that's the type of message that we have to be sending out, is that we want a bright future, and one that is, and it's not just, I suppose, words to say inclusive, but we look at, the 6 counties, and I suppose the way it was set up to exclude a certain proportion of the population. We've seen an election now that has confounded everything that the state was set up to do, which was to prevent a nationalist majority in the assembly. But likewise in the south, we've seen, I suppose, a state that's taken a long time to break from the shackles of the church, to break, from the conservative mindset that was there, and, and that hold. So I really think it's a really positive message to be sending out, that, this is a bright future. What would we like to see? Let's have the conversation. But it's that idea that if you want to see something better, so if you live in the north and you want to see a better future for yourself, whatever your cultural background is, and likewise in the south, if you live in the south and you think that we can do things better than we have done for the last 100 years of partition, then let's come together and let's set out what that template is. And I think that's really exciting, and it's a really positive message. And that's what I got again from the young people in the room that day. They were going, "Oh, this would be great." Yes, of course, there's lots of details to work out. Yes, of course, there would have to be a phased approach, and in terms of education and things like that. But it is a really positive message that, if we can sell it that way, I think, that people shouldn't be afraid of it. They should be seizing that opportunity, like James Nesbitt is saying. This is a better future for us all.
Brilliant. And Jim, I believe it was your party's Ardèche on the day of this conference. But when you heard Mr. Nesbitt's comments, what was your thoughts?
Well, I'm pleased to say I was at my party's Ardèche, and I was also at the Ireland's Future Conference. I've managed to perfect by location over the years. Tricia, listen, I thought it was a very positive message that he said. But I suppose the response to it, and I think it's something when we're all discussing this topic, we all need to be aware that, our history and our past casts a very long shadow on our views on this issue. And like all of our contributions here, we mightn't realize the extent to which all our contributions are affected by our past and our history. But all I would say is that I think we do need to recognize that there has been extraordinary change on this island in the 100 years since partition. And if you look back to the reasons for partition, like the reasons were primarily because Northern Protestants believed that the Catholic Church was going to exert far too much influence in a unified state if it was either a home rule one or if it was a fully independent one. They had great concerns about the fact that the economy, which was so strong in the Northeast, was going to be dominated by what was perceived as and correctly was perceived as a very agrarian, agriculture-based, poor society at the time. And also, I suppose, there was the desire to retain loyalty to the Crown. Like 2 out of those 3 issues are now gone in terms of the dominance of the Catholic Church, in terms of the South being an economic basket case. Like the roles to a large extent have been reversed, and I don't say that for any economic one-upmanship. But so I suppose the point I'm trying to make, we can't allow ourselves to be frozen back in the politics of 1921. The world has completely changed, and the island of Ireland has completely changed. And I think we all need to approach this issue by recognizing there are other people who maybe don't have the same shadow of the past cast over them, and we need to get them into the debate. We need to broaden this debate out, so it's not just perceived as a debate between green and orange. I would have thought probably the majority of people in Northern Ireland in a number of years from now probably won't be defining themselves in such simple binary terms. It's like the politics in the South have become much more sophisticated as well. So like I welcome what James Nesbitt said. you know, and we just need to get away from the politics of 1920. It's a different country, it's a different island, it's a different world, and we need to allow discussions which are going to be guided by what's in the best interest of us for the future, rather than what happened in the past.
Thank you, Jim. And I'm just keeping an eye on the time. I knew the conversation would flow really well with our panelists. So I'll ask the question that this debate is about. What does the Irish, the Northern Ireland and the British governments need to do going forward on this issue? And I'll go to Emma first.
Oh, just an easy question there, Trish. Okay, well, I mean, I'll start with the Irish government. It's an easy one because there's a lot of work that can be done. I know there have been recommendations from academics that there should be a unity brief created with a minister and a department that is working towards planning and preparation. And I've seen some pushback on that idea, and often the arguments against it are, we don't want to create any kind of instability with the state of Northern Ireland as it is. But, you know, Northern Ireland is never stable, guys. There's always a political crisis. And the idea that you don't take the necessary steps to prepare because of that kind of background, that political background, it's just kind of feeding into the instability and not actually stabilizing it. So that's one thing that can be done. Now, another is to action a series of deliberative dialogues. As I said, I favor that over a citizens' assembly model, because the citizens' assembly model, where you're bringing 100 citizens, is a great vehicle for addressing complex issues. But when you're looking at something like a United Ireland, okay, that's a lot of stuff to put into a citizens' assembly. Are you talking about putting in health, education, policing, justice, identity and culture? You know, what are the post boxes going to be? Are they going to be red? Are they going to be green? What about the road markings? The list of stuff that you have to have a conversation about is so broad, is so expansive, it's so large, that the idea that 100 citizens in a citizens' assembly is going to take care of that is just not, in my view, realistic. Now, doing a series of deliberative dialogues where you go into communities and you talk about what might this look like, how do you feel about it, what are your concerns, what can we do to address those concerns, what would you like to see? You start having a conversation with people about creating a vision, about opportunity, about what might happen in the event of constitutional change. I think that's a much better approach, and there's absolutely nothing stopping the Irish government from doing that. And it is a point of frustration that rather than take those kind of steps, we have, you know, 3 coalition party leaders, all of which have used the term divisive when referring to a border pool. And I think that kind of language is actually quite unhelpful, because you know, it's not divisive to talk about aspiring to unite the island of Ireland. It's a legitimate aspiration under the Good Friday Agreement. And all referendums, by their very nature, are divisive, because there's always going to be a yes or no. That's just democracy. So I think that kind of language is quite unhelpful. So as a first step, that's something that the Irish government could do in terms of trying to action some kind of citizen dialogue, preferably something that is taking place across local government, so it can, you know, be actioned into a much larger scale. Now, in terms of the UK government, I don't think we're going to see much from them in terms of delivering any kind of clarity, at least this current government. But the Labour government, if they do come in the next general election, have already said that they will outline what the criteria is for the Secretary of State to call a border pool. That would be very helpful to have that information. And in terms of the Northern Irish executive, if it ever gets back up and running, of course, there should be steps taken to plan and prepare as well. Similar citizen dialogues taking place across Northern Ireland should happen. We do have a commitment under New Decade, New Approach to hold citizens' assemblies in Northern Ireland. We've never had one, so it would be good to see that kind of action taken, as well as commissioning research into how we would look at things like creating an all-island education system.
Thanks, Emma. Aaron, what's your thoughts on the 3 governments going forward on this Irish unity debate?
Well, I think Emma's given considerable thought and in detail to, you know, some of the what needs to be done, some of the work that needs to be done. I think from my point of view, I mean, the things to avoid would be to ensure that learning from recent history, the acrimonious debates and discussions around Scottish independence and Brexit, and so on, and learning from that and taking forward any kind of proposal. But I think ultimately there will need to be some kind of buy-in, because I think if you can't get buy-in from the unionist community, then it's really going to set it up as a much more divisive conversation, I think, than it needs to be. So I think going forward, I mean, I would say from the point of view of the Northern Ireland executive, if it ever gets up and running again before there's another British general election, I think that they do need to reaffirm their commitment to the previous agreements and the changes that have been brought in since the Good Friday Agreement. But essentially, we do need some kind of functioning devolved government there, delivering for everyone. And I think that both parties really there, Sinn Féin and the DUP, need to recommit themselves to what people voted for in the late 1990s and make sure that the conversations, the legitimate conversations, as we've heard from Emma, and it's important to point that out, that they are legitimate conversations. People can have them. I'm agnostic on this totally. People can have them if they want them. It's all to play for. But I think there is a responsibility to bring together people in a way where they can have those conversations, difficult though they may be, but in the spirit of peace and exclusively democratic means that they do it within that framework. Because otherwise, unfortunately, there is a real risk that having these conversations beyond and above the heads of communities and people, that something terrible will happen going forward. So I think in the spirit of the conversation that we've had today, I think inclusivity needs to bring more people into the big tent to talk about these issues.
Thank you, Aaron. And we've less than 3 minutes left. Time flies when you're having fun. So Lynn, can you tell me, and Jim after Lynn, what your thoughts are on that in a minute, if possible?
Well, I suppose from the government's point of view, I think that I'll go back to it. I think the Citizens' Assembly, we need to start preparing for that. But I also agree that like those, deliberative dialogues or citizens' assemblies, which Emma referred to in the North, those things need to be happening. And, and Aaron's right, we need to be going out into communities and talking to them. There's only so much political parties can do. And that's my point of like coming from a government-led initiative in the South. Do you know what I mean? It gives it that much more legitimacy. But we are having those deliberative dialogues, and they're happening. We've had 5 of them already, even with the restrictions around COVID. Look, I think that the British government is the British government. They've shown that they don't really respect the democratic wishes of the people of the North. We're seeing that with the legacy bill. We've seen that with Brexit. So hopefully, if there is a Labour government, that might shift things along. And 100%, the Assembly needs to be up and running, and hopefully that is going to happen in the autumn. And that's certainly what Sinn Féin is working very hard to ensure it does happen.
Thanks, Lynn. And Jim?
Yeah, thanks, Trish. And I think it would be helpful if there was broad recognition that discussing reunification is a perfectly legitimate political aspiration and objective. It's not subversive, it's not sinister, and people are perfectly entitled to advocate that. Similarly, people are perfectly entitled, obviously, to advocate maintaining Northern Ireland's position within the United Kingdom. So this needs to become a normalised political debate that is resolved in the same way as most other political debates are resolved through discussion, debate, and ultimately democracy. In terms of the Irish government, I suppose the Irish government did something quite unusual under the Good Friday Agreement. We decided that another jurisdiction over which we have no control can decide whether or not we have a referendum in our jurisdiction about Irish reunification. So there's a responsibility, I think, on an Irish government as a result of that, to prepare for that eventuality when it arises, and if it arises. And it could arise quite quickly, but we certainly need to be prepared for it. And simply by being prepared for it, I don't think people from different communities, from the unionist communities in Northern Ireland should feel threatened by that. They shouldn't. And in fact, I think many of them